It was a warm Saturday afternoon, the kind of day that Margaret loved. The sunlight streamed through the kitchen window, casting a golden hue over the wooden table where she and I had shared so many meals, so many conversations. The house was eerily quiet now, as if it too was mourning her absence. She'd been gone for nearly 3 months, and I was still grappling with the void she left behind. Grief is a strange thing. It's not linear, not something you can measure or predict. It comes in waves, crashing over you when you least expect it, pulling you under until you're gasping for air. I thought I had a handle on it, that I could keep it at bay by focusing on Alina, our daughter, but even that was starting to slip away from me. I had always been a man who valued honesty above all else. Margaret knew that about me from the start. It was the foundation of our relationship, the bedrock of our marriage. Or so I thought. But the doubts had begun to creep in, insidious and unwelcome, after that unsettling conversation with Margaret's grandmother. "Carlos, can you come here for a minute?" Alina's voice called from the living room, interrupting my thoughts. She had been spending more time at home lately, trying to fill the silence with her presence. I appreciated it, even if I wasn't the best company these days. "Be right there," I replied, forcing a smile as I walked into the living room. She was sitting on the couch, flipping through an old photo album, one that Margaret had meticulously put together over the years. "Look at this," she said, her voice tinged with nostalgia. "This was from that trip we took to the Grand Canyon when I was 7. Do you remember?" I nodded, sitting down beside her. The memory was bittersweet. Margaret had been so excited for that trip, planning every detail down to the snacks we'd bring for the drive. We had taken countless pictures, capturing every moment, every smile. Alina was so small back then, her hair in pigtails, her eyes wide with wonder at the vastness of the canyon. "I remember," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "You were so scared to go near the edge, but your mom finally convinced you it was safe." Alina laughed, the sound light and genuine. "Yeah, she promised me I wouldn't fall." I trusted her completely. Her words struck me like a blow to the chest. Trust. It was such a simple word, yet it carried so much weight. I had trusted Margaret completely too, and now I wasn't sure what to believe anymore. I must have gone quiet because Alina looked up at me, her brow furrowed in concern. "Dad, are you okay? You seem a little off." I forced another smile, trying to push the dark thoughts away. "I'm fine, sweetheart. Just a lot on my mind." She didn't seem convinced, but she let it go, turning back to the album. I watched her for a moment, my heart heavy with the doubts that had been gnawing at me since that conversation with Margaret's grandmother. It had been at the funeral, in the midst of all the grief and condolences. Margaret's grandmother, a sharp-witted woman well into her 90s, had pulled me aside. Her grip on my arm was surprisingly strong, her eyes sharp as they met mine. "Carlos, listen to me," she had said, her voice low but firm. "Not everything is as it seems. Margaret, she loved you, but there are things you need to know." I had been too stunned to respond, too deep in my grief to process what she was saying. Before I could ask her to explain, she had been whisked away by a distant relative, leaving me standing there, confused and shaken. At first, I had dismissed her words as the ramblings of an old woman stricken by the loss of her granddaughter. But the more I thought about it, the more it ate away at me. What did she mean? What didn't I know? The doubts festered, growing larger with each passing day. I began to see Alina differently, not in the way that a father looks at his daughter, but with a sense of unease. Little things that I had never questioned before suddenly seemed suspicious. Her smile, the shape of her nose, the color of her eyes. Were these the features of a man who had raised her, or of someone else entirely? I couldn't keep the doubts to myself any longer. They were poisoning every interaction, every shared moment. I needed answers, needed to know if the life I had lived, the love I had given, was based on a lie. "Alina," I said suddenly, breaking the silence. She looked up at me, startled by the intensity in my voice. "There's something I need to ask you." She closed the photo album, giving me her full attention. "What is it, Dad?" I hesitated, the words caught in my throat. How could I ask this of her? How could I even entertain the thought? But the doubt, the uncertainty, it was too much to bear. "Did your mother ever, did she ever mention anything to you about?" I trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. Alina's eyes narrowed in confusion, About what? Dad, what's going on? I took a deep breath, forcing myself to meet her gaze. About your real father. The moment the words left my mouth, I wanted to take them back, to pretend I had never said them. But it was too late. The look on Alina's face was one of shock, of hurt. What are you talking about? She asked, her voice trembling. You're my father. Why would you even ask that? I felt a lump form in my throat, guilt and shame washing over me. I don't know, Alina. There are things that have come up, things that I can't ignore. I need to know the truth. She shook her head, her eyes filling with tears. What truth? What are you saying? Are you saying I'm not your daughter? I wanted to reach out, to comfort her, but I couldn't move. The doubts had taken root, and I couldn't shake them. I don't know, Alina. I need to be sure. She stared at me for a long moment, her expression a mixture of hurt and disbelief. I don't understand. Why now? Why are you suddenly questioning everything? I couldn't meet her gaze. I talked to your great-grandmother at the funeral. She said some things that made me question what I thought I knew. Alina wiped away the tears that had begun to fall, her hands trembling. So, you think Mom cheated on you? You think I'm not really your daughter? I didn't want to believe it. I wanted to tell her that it was all a mistake, that everything would be fine, but the doubts wouldn't let me. I don't know what to think, I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. I need to be sure, Alina, for both of us. The silence that followed was suffocating, heavy with unspoken words and broken trust. Alina looked at me as if she didn't recognize me, as if I had become a stranger in her life. I can't believe you'd even think that, she said finally, her voice thick with emotion. Mom loves you and I'm your daughter. Why can't you just trust that? Her words cut deep, a reminder of the man I used to be, the man who valued honesty above all else. But the doubts, the uncertainty, they had changed me, turned me into someone I didn't recognize. I wish I could, I said, my voice breaking. But I need to know the truth, Alina. I need to know for sure. She stood up, the photo album forgotten on the couch, and looked down at me with a mixture of anger and sadness. If you don't trust me, if you don't trust Mom, then maybe you never really loved us at all. And with that, she turned and walked away, leaving me alone with my doubts, my guilt, and the growing realization that the truth I sought might destroy everything I held dear. The envelope sat on the kitchen table, glaring at me like an unwanted guest. It had been there for 2 days, unopened, yet it felt like it had been staring at me for an eternity. I knew what it held, the answer to the question that had been gnawing at my soul, tearing at the fabric of my sanity. The DNA test results. I had requested the test a week after that fateful conversation with Alina. The guilt of my suspicions had kept me awake at night, but the need to know, to have a definitive answer, had driven me to the edge. It was as if I was standing at the precipice, staring down into an abyss of uncertainty. I needed something to pull me back, to ground me, even if that something would shatter my world. I poured myself a glass of whiskey, the amber liquid swirling in the glass, as I tried to steady my shaking hand. The house was silent, the kind of silence that makes your ears ring, that presses in on you until you feel like you might suffocate. Alina had been staying with a friend for the past few days, the tension between us too thick to bear under the same roof. I had driven her away with my doubts, my suspicions, and now I was alone to face the consequences. Taking a deep breath, I set the glass down and reached for the envelope. My fingers fumbled with the seal, the paper tearing in my haste. I pulled out the single sheet of paper, my eyes scanning the lines of text, my heart pounding in my chest. And there it was, in black and white. The confirmation of my worst fears. Alina was not my biological daughter. The world seemed to tilt on its axis, my breath catching in my throat as I reread the words, hoping that somehow I had made a mistake, that the results were wrong. But the truth was undeniable, the evidence clear as day. Margaret had lied to me, had betrayed the very foundation of our marriage, and I was left to pick up the pieces. I don't know how long I sat there, staring at the paper, feeling as if the air had been sucked out of the room. My mind raced with 1,000 questions, none of which had answers. How long had she known? Did she ever plan to tell me? Who was Alina's real father? The anger came next, burning hot and fierce, a fire in my chest that threatened to consume me. I had loved Margaret with every fibre of my being, had trusted her implicitly, and she had repaid that trust with deceit. How could she do this to me? To us? I grabbed the glass of whiskey and hurled it across the room, watching as it shattered against the wall, the amber liquid dripping down like tears. The sound was loud in the silence, echoing in the empty house, but it did nothing to quench the rage boiling inside me. In the midst of my anger, the doorbell rang. The sound jolted me from my thoughts, my body stiffening as I wiped my face with my hands, trying to pull myself together. Who could it be? Alina wasn't due back until tomorrow. I opened the door to find my best friend, Peter, standing on the porch. He was a tall man with a strong build and a calm demeanor that had always balanced out my more impulsive nature. We had been friends for over 20 years, through thick and thin, and he had been there for me when Margaret passed away. He had been the one to help me arrange the funeral, to handle the things I couldn't bear to face. "Hey, Carlos," he said, his voice soft, his eyes scanning my face with concern. "I was in the neighborhood and thought I'd check in on you. Mind if I come in?" I hesitated for a moment, then stepped aside to let him in. We walked into the living room, and Peter immediately noticed the broken glass and the spilled whiskey on the floor. "Rough day?" he asked, raising an eyebrow. I sighed, rubbing my temples as I sank down onto the couch. "You could say that." He sat down beside me, the air between us heavy with unspoken words. He didn't push me to talk, just waited, his presence a steady anchor in the storm that was raging inside me. Finally, I couldn't hold it in any longer. "Peter, I got the DNA test results back." His expression didn't change, but I saw the flash of understanding in his eyes. He had known about my doubts, had tried to reassure me, but I could tell that he was just as curious about the truth as I was. "And?" he asked quietly. "She's not mine," I said, the words tasting bitter on my tongue. "Alina, she's not my daughter." Peter's face remained calm, but I could see the shock in his eyes. He opened his mouth to say something, but then closed it, as if he wasn't sure what words would be appropriate. "Dane Carlos," he finally said, his voice low. "I'm so sorry." I shook my head, the anger and betrayal swirling in my chest, too overwhelming to let me feel the comfort his words were meant to offer. "I don't even know what to think anymore, Peter. I thought I knew Margaret. I thought our marriage was built on trust, on honesty. But now I don't even know who she was." Peter leaned back, crossing his arms as he considered my words. "She was your wife, Carlos. The woman you loved for over 20 years. That hasn't changed, even if the circumstances have." "But it has changed," I shut back, my voice rising. "Everything's changed. She lied to me, Peter. She kept this from me for all these years. How am I supposed to reconcile that with the woman I thought I knew?" Peter sighed, rubbing his hands over his face. "Look, I can't pretend to understand what you're going through. This is a hell of a situation, and I won't try to tell you how to feel. But I do know one thing, you loved Margaret, and she loved you. Whatever happened, whatever her reasons were, that love was real." I scoffed, the bitterness rising in my throat. "How can you say that? How can you talk about love when she betrayed me like this?" "Because love is complicated," Peter said, his voice firm. "People make mistakes, sometimes big ones, but that doesn't erase everything else. I'm not saying you shouldn't be angry, or hurt, or feel betrayed. But you can't let this destroy everything good that you and Margaret had. And more importantly, you can't let it destroy what you have with Alina." At the mention of Alina, my anger faltered, replaced by a deep, gnawing guilt. I had been so consumed by my own pain, my own sense of betrayal, that I hadn't thought about what this meant for her. She was the innocent one in all of this, the one caught in the middle of a truth she never asked for. "She doesn't know yet," I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. "She knows I had doubts, but I haven't told her the results. I don't know how to tell her, Peter. How do I tell my daughter that she's not really mine?" Peter was quiet for a moment, then he leaned forward, his eyes locking onto mine. "Carlos, she is yours. Maybe not by blood, but in every way that matters. You raised her, loved her, cared for her. She's your daughter, no matter what some test says." I wanted to believe him, wanted to hold on to the idea that our bond was stronger than the truth of her parentage. But the betrayal, the knowledge that Margaret had kept this secret from me, was too fresh, too raw. "I don't know if I can do it," I confessed, my voice breaking. I don't know if I can look at her and not see the lie that Margaret told. I don't know if I can get past this. Peter reached out and put a hand on my shoulder, his grip firm and reassuring. You're stronger than you think, Carlos. You've been through hell and back, and you're still standing. Take some time, figure out how you feel, but don't push Alina away. She needs you, now more than ever. I nodded, but the weight of the betrayal still hung heavy on my shoulders, pressing down on me until it felt like I might collapse under it. The truth was out, but it had left me with more questions than answers, more pain than relief. I didn't know how to move forward, how to rebuild the life that had been shattered by a single piece of paper. As Peter left that evening, the silence of the house closed in around me once more. I sat alone in the living room, the DNA results still clutched in my hand, the words blurring as tears filled my eyes. Margaret was gone, and with her, the life I thought I knew. All that was left was the jagged pieces of a broken heart and a daughter who was and wasn't mine. And I had no idea how to put it all back together. The days that followed were a blur, each one bleeding into the next, colored by a haze of anger, sorrow, and confusion. I moved through the house like a ghost, haunted by memories of a life that now seemed like a cruel illusion. Everywhere I looked, I saw reminders of Margaret, the framed photographs on the walls, the scented candles she loved, the half-finished knitting project still draped over her favorite armchair. Alina returned home after a few days at her friend's house, her presence both a comfort and a painful reminder of Margaret's betrayal. We moved around each other carefully, our conversations stilted and brief, like strangers forced to share a space. The warmth and easy rapport we once shared had been replaced by a tension so thick it was suffocating. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the living room, Alina approached me. I was sitting in the armchair, staring blankly at the television, not really watching the images flickering on the screen. "Dad," she began tentatively, her voice soft. "Can we talk?" I looked up, meeting her eyes. They were so much like Margaret's, deep, expressive, and now filled with a mixture of apprehension and determination. "Of course," I replied, gesturing to the couch opposite me. She sat down, smoothing her hands over her jeans, a nervous habit she'd had since childhood. For a moment, neither of us spoke, the silence stretching out between us like a chasm. Finally, she broke the silence. "I know things have been difficult lately. I can feel it, even if we don't talk about it. I want to understand what's going on." I took a deep breath, my chest tightening. This was the conversation I had been dreading, the one I had been avoiding since the DNA results came back. But I knew I couldn't keep running from it. Alina deserved the truth. "Alina," I began, choosing my words carefully. "You remember when we talked about the doubts I was having about your mother and your paternity?" She nodded slowly, her eyes never leaving my face. "I got the DNA test results back," I continued, my voice faltering. "They confirmed that I'm not your biological father." Her face paled, her eyes widening as the words sank in. She opened her mouth as if to speak, then closed it, her hands gripping the edge of the couch cushion tightly. "I'm so sorry," I whispered, feeling the weight of my own words crushing me. She looked down, her hair falling forward to hide her face. "So, all this time, Mom lied to us?" "I don't know the full story," I admitted. "I wish I did. But yes, it seems she kept this from both of us." Alina's shoulders trembled, and I realized she was crying silently. The sight tore at my heart, and before I knew it, I was kneeling in front of her, reaching out to take her hands in mine. "Alina, listen to me," I said urgently. "This doesn't change how I feel about you. You are my daughter in every way that matters. I have loved you since the day you were born, and nothing will ever change that." She looked up, her eyes red and glistening with tears. "But you sent me away," she choked out. "You pushed me away when you started having doubts." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. She was right. In my pain and confusion, I had distanced myself from her, making her feel unwanted and unloved. "I was wrong," I confessed, my voice breaking. "I was hurting, and I let that pain cloud my judgment. I should have been there for you, should have reassured you instead of pushing you away. I'm so sorry, Alina." She sniffed, wiping her tears with the back of her hand. I feel like I've lost both my parents now." "No," I said firmly, squeezing her hands. You haven't lost me. I'm here, and I'm not going anywhere. I promise you that. She looked at me for a long moment, searching my face for sincerity. Slowly, she nodded, a small spark of hope flickering in her eyes. Okay, she whispered. I believe you. We embraced, holding on to each other as if anchoring ourselves in the storm of emotions that threatened to overwhelm us. For a moment, it felt like a healing balm on a raw wound, a reminder that despite everything, our bond was still strong. But as the days passed, the initial relief of our conversation faded, replaced by a lingering unease. Every time I looked at Alina, I couldn't help but see the traces of another man in her features, a constant reminder of Margaret's betrayal. It wasn't fair to Alina, and I hated myself for feeling that way, but I couldn't control it. One evening, as I sat alone in the kitchen, nursing a cup of cold coffee, the weight of it all pressed down on me. I needed space, needed time to process everything without the constant reminders surrounding me. The idea came unbidden, a thought that seemed both a solution and a coward's escape. Perhaps if Alina went to stay with Margaret's grandmother for a while, we could both have the space we needed. Margaret's grandmother adored Alina, and the change of scenery might do her good. The next morning, I approached Alina as she was eating breakfast. Her eyes flicked up to meet mine, wary but hopeful. Alina, I began cautiously. I've been thinking. Maybe it would be good for you to spend some time with your great-grandmother. She's been asking about you, and I think it might help us both to have a little space. Her fork paused midway to her mouth, her eyes widening in surprise. You want me to leave? It's not about wanting you to leave, I hurriedly explained. It's about giving us both time to heal and process everything. Your great-grandmother would love to have you, and it might be good for you to get away from all the tension here. She set her fork down, her hands trembling slightly. It feels like you're sending me away because you can't stand to look at me. The accusation stung, mainly because there was a kernel of truth in it. I swallowed hard, struggling to find the right words. That's not it, Alina, I insisted, though my voice lacked conviction. I just think some time apart might help us both. She looked away, her jaw tightening. If that's what you want. Is it what you want? I asked gently. She shrugged, her shoulders tense. I don't know anymore. The resignation in her voice cut deep, but I couldn't bring myself to retract the suggestion. The decision had been made, and I hoped that in time she would understand. 2 days later, we stood on the porch, her suitcase by her side. The taxi waited at the curb, its engine idling. Alina looked at me, her eyes searching mine for something, perhaps a sign that I had changed my mind. Call me when you get there, I said, forcing a smile. She nodded silently then, after a brief hesitation, stepped forward and hugged me. I held her tightly, the familiar scent of her hair bringing a rush of memories, of bedtime stories, scraped knees, and laughter. Take care, Dad, she whispered. You too, sweetheart, I replied, my voice thick. She pulled away, grabbing her suitcase and making her way to the taxi. I watched as she got in, the door closing behind her with a finality that echoed in my heart. The taxi pulled away, disappearing down the street, taking with it a piece of my soul. As I stood alone on the porch, the reality of what I had done settled over me like a heavy shroud. I had sent my daughter away, distancing myself in the hopes of finding clarity, but all I felt was an emptiness that threatened to swallow me whole. I retreated into the house, the silence oppressive. Every corner, every piece of furniture seemed to whisper memories of happier times, mocking my solitude. I wandered into Alina's room, the bed neatly made, her favorite stuffed animal propped against the pillows. I sat on the edge of the bed, burying my face in my hands. What had I done? In my quest for the truth, I had torn apart the very fabric of my family, pushing away the one person who needed me the most. A knock at the front door startled me. I wiped my face, composing myself as I made my way to the door. Opening it, I found Peter standing there, his expression a mix of concern and determination. Hey, Carlos, he greeted. Mind if I come in? I stepped aside, allowing him entry. He looked around, his eyes taking in the emptiness of the house. Where's Alina? He asked. She's gone to stay with her great-grandmother for a while, I replied tersely. Peter frowned, turning to face me. You sent her away. I thought it would be best, I defended, crossing my arms. Best for whom? He challenged. You or her? I looked away, unable to meet his gaze. Both of us. Peter sighed, running a hand through his hair. Carlos, I know this is hard, but pushing Alina away isn't the answer. She's your daughter, regardless of blood. She needs you. I need time, I insisted, my voice rising. I can't deal with all of this right now. And what about Alina? Peter pressed. How do you think she feels? Losing her mother and now feeling like she's losing her father too. His words hit home, stirring the guilt that had been festering within me. I sank onto the couch, my head in my hands. I don't know what to do, I admitted, my voice muffled. Everything feels wrong. Peter sat beside me, placing a hand on my shoulder. Talk to her. Be honest. Work through this together. Pushing her away will only make things worse. I looked up, meeting his earnest gaze. I don't know if I can. You can, he insisted, because despite everything you love her. Don't let Margaret's mistakes destroy the bond you have with Alina. I nodded slowly, the weight of his words sinking in. Perhaps he was right. Perhaps in my pain, I had lost sight of what truly mattered. I'll call her, I resolved, standing up. I'll make things right. Peter smiled, standing as well. That's the Carlos I know. As he left, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. It wouldn't be easy, and the road ahead was fraught with challenges, but I owed it to Alina, and to myself, to try. I picked up the phone, dialing Alina's number. It rang twice before she answered, her voice tentative. Hello. Alina, it's Dad, I began, my heart pounding. I need to talk to you. Okay, she replied softly. Can I come visit? Maybe we can go for a walk and talk things through. There was a brief pause before she answered. I'd like that. Relief washed over me, a small step towards healing the rift I had caused. I'll see you tomorrow, I promised. As I hung up, I felt a glimmer of hope. The path to reconciliation wouldn't be easy, but with honesty and love, perhaps we could find our way back to each other. The morning sun filtered through the kitchen window, casting a soft glow across the room. I stood at the counter, absent-mindedly stirring a cup of coffee, my thoughts a tangled mess of guilt, regret, and uncertainty. The conversation with Alina the night before had left me with a sense of hope, but also with a gnawing fear that I might not be able to repair the damage I had caused. As I sipped the bitter coffee, I heard a knock at the front door. The sound startled me out of my thoughts, and I set the mug down, making my way to the door. When I opened it, I found Mrs. Thompson standing on the porch, a warm smile on her face. Mrs. Thompson had been my neighbor for as long as I could remember. She was a widow in her late 60s, with silver hair that she always kept neatly pinned back and a kind demeanor that made her the unofficial confidant of the neighborhood. She had been there for me and Margaret countless times over the years, bringing over homemade casseroles when Alina was born, offering a sympathetic ear after Margaret's death, and now, it seemed, she had come to check on me once again. Good morning, Carlos, she greeted, her voice gentle. Good morning, Mrs. Thompson, I replied, managing a small smile. What brings you by? I was just out for a walk and thought I'd see how you were doing, she said, her eyes crinkling with concern. Mind if I come in? Not at all, I said, stepping aside to let her in. We walked into the kitchen, and she took a seat at the table, glancing at the half-empty mug of coffee. Looks like you've already started your day. I shrugged, sitting down across from her, just trying to clear my head. She nodded, taking a moment before speaking. I've noticed things have been a little different around here lately. Alina hasn't been around much, and you seem like you've got the weight of the world on your shoulders. I sighed, running a hand through my hair. Yeah, it's been rough. Mrs. Thompson leaned forward, her expression softening. Carlos, I've known you for a long time, and I've seen you go through your share of hardships, but this seems different. Do you want to talk about it? For a moment, I hesitated. I had always kept my troubles close to the vest, especially when it came to something as personal as what I was going through now. But Mrs. Thompson had always been someone I could trust, someone who had a way of cutting through the noise and offering the kind of wisdom that only comes from a lifetime of experience. It's about Alina, I finally said, my voice low. I found out recently that she's not my biological daughter. Mrs. Thompson's eyes widened slightly, but she remained composed. Carlos, I'm so sorry." I nodded, the familiar ache in my chest tightening. It's been tearing me apart. I've been trying to figure out how to deal with it, how to make sense of everything. I even sent Alina to stay with her great-grandmother for a while because I just didn't know how to handle it. She reached across the table, placing a hand over mine. I can't imagine how hard that must be, finding out something like that after all these years. But Carlos, sending Alina away, that's not the answer. I know, I admitted, my voice breaking. But every time I look at her, I see the lie, the betrayal. I love her, but it's so hard to separate that love from the anger I feel toward Margaret. Mrs. Thompson squeezed my hand gently. You're right to feel hurt, to feel angry. But you have to remember, Alina is innocent in all of this. She didn't ask for this, and she's just as confused and hurt as you are. I know, I said again, my voice barely above a whisper. I talked to her last night, and I could hear it in her voice, the fear, the uncertainty. I've let her down, Mrs. Thompson. I pushed her away when she needed me the most. Mrs. Thompson's eyes softened even further, and she gave my hand another reassuring squeeze. Carlos, you've always been a good father to Alina, and I'm sure she knows that, deep down. But you have to show her that your love for her hasn't changed, that it's not about blood, but about the bond you've built over the years. I looked down at our joined hands, the truth of her words settling over me like a blanket of comfort. I want to, but it's so hard to move past the betrayal. How do I do that? How do I stop seeing Margaret's lie every time I look at Alina? Mrs. Thompson sat back, her expression thoughtful. Healing takes time, Carlos. You can't rush it, and you can't force yourself to feel something you're not ready to feel. But you can take small steps. Focus on the love you have for Alina, the memories you've shared, the life you've built together. Those are the things that matter. She paused, looking at me with a mixture of compassion and firmness. And Carlos, forgiveness isn't about forgetting or excusing what Margaret did. It's about freeing yourself from the pain so it doesn't consume you. It's about choosing to let go so you can move forward with Alina. Her words struck a chord deep within me. Forgiveness. I had been so wrapped up in my anger, in the feeling of betrayal, that I hadn't even considered forgiveness. It wasn't about absolving Margaret of her actions, but about finding a way to release the grip that anger had on me. I'm scared, I admitted, my voice trembling. I'm scared that if I forgive her, I'll be betraying myself, betraying the trust I had in her. Mrs. Thompson shook her head gently. Forgiveness isn't betrayal, Carlos. It's a gift you give yourself. It's a way to reclaim your peace, to take back the power that the hurt has over you. And it's a way to honor the love you still have for Alina. I sat in silence for a long moment, letting her words sink in. She was right, of course. Holding onto the anger, the pain, was only hurting me and Alina. If I wanted to heal, if I wanted to repair my relationship with my daughter, I had to find a way to forgive. Not for Margaret's sake, but for my own and for Alina's. Thank you, I finally said, looking up at Mrs. Thompson with gratitude. I needed to hear that. She smiled warmly, her eyes crinkling at the corners. Any time, Carlos. You're not alone in this, and you never have to be. Remember that. I nodded, feeling a sense of clarity that had eluded me for weeks. I'm going to call Alina again, talk to her, really talk to her. I'll tell her how much I love her, how much she means to me, no matter what. Mrs. Thompson's smile widened. That's the right thing to do. And you'll see, Carlos, love has a way of mending even the deepest wounds. As she left, I felt a renewed sense of purpose, a determination to make things right. Mrs. Thompson's words had given me a new perspective, a way forward that I hadn't been able to see before. I picked up the phone and dialed Alina's number, my heart pounding in my chest. The phone rang, and with each ring, I felt a mixture of hope and fear. Hello. Alina's voice came through the line, soft and hesitant. Alina, it's Dad, I said, taking a deep breath. I know we talked yesterday, but I've been thinking, and there's more I need to say. There was a pause on the other end of the line, and I could almost hear her holding her breath. Okay, she said quietly. I'm listening. I love you, Alina, I began, my voice steady. I love you more than anything in this world. I know things have been difficult, and I know I've made mistakes, big mistakes. But I need you to know that none of this changes how I feel about you. You are my daughter, and you always will be. I love you too, Dad, she replied, her voice breaking slightly. I've been so scared that you wouldn't want me anymore. I'm sorry I made you feel that way, I said, my throat tightening. I was hurting, and I let that pain cloud my judgment, but I'm done with that now. I want to move forward together. I want to heal, and I want us to be okay. She was silent for a moment, and when she spoke again, there was a softness in her voice that brought tears to my eyes. I want that too. Then let's start over, I suggested. No more pushing each other away. We'll take it one day at a time, and we'll figure this out together. How does that sound? It sounds good, she whispered. I'd like that. As I hung up the phone, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. It wasn't a complete solution, and I knew there would still be challenges ahead, but it was a start. Mrs. Thompson's wisdom had helped me see that the path to healing wasn't about erasing the past, but about finding a way to live with it, to move forward with love and forgiveness. And for the first time in a long while, I felt like I was on the right path. The following weeks were a delicate dance of emotions, filled with small steps forward and occasional slips back into old habits of doubt and grief. But with each passing day, Alina and I began to find our way back to one another, rebuilding the trust that had been fractured by the truth. Alina returned home after a week with her great-grandmother. When she walked through the front door, I could see the uncertainty in her eyes, the hesitation in her movements. She glanced around the familiar space, as if gauging whether anything had changed in her absence. "Hey, sweetheart," I greeted her softly, standing in the hallway. "How was your trip?" She shrugged, setting her bag down by the door. "It was good. Great-grandma sends her love." I nodded, stepping forward to take her coat. "I'm glad to hear that." There was an awkward pause, both of us standing there, unsure of what to say next. The air was thick with the unspoken words between us, the memories of our last conversations lingering like ghosts in the room. "I made your favorite for dinner," I offered, trying to break the tension. "Lasagna." A small smile tugged at the corners of her mouth. "Really?" "Really," I confirmed, feeling a flicker of warmth at her response. "I thought we could have a nice meal together and talk." She nodded, her smile fading slightly as the weight of our unfinished conversation settled over us. "Yeah, I'd like that." We moved to the dining room, where the table was already set, the lasagna steaming in its dish at the center. As we sat down, I couldn't help but feel a sense of déjà vu. This was the way things used to be before everything changed, before the truth came crashing down on us. For a few minutes, we ate in silence, the clinking of forks against plates the only sound in the room. I could see the thoughts racing through Alina's mind, the questions she was too afraid to ask. And I knew that if we were going to rebuild what had been broken, we needed to confront those questions head-on. "Alina," I began, setting my fork down and looking across the table at her. "I know we've already talked about this, but I want to make sure you understand something. What happened with your mother, it was never your fault. You didn't do anything wrong, and you never have to feel like you were to blame for any of this." She looked up at me, her eyes filled with a mixture of sadness and relief. "I know that, Dad. At least I'm trying to know that. It's hard not to feel like everything's different now." "I understand," I said gently. "Everything does feel different, and it's going to take time for both of us to adjust. But what hasn't changed is how much I love you. I need you to believe that." She nodded, her gaze dropping to her plate. "I do believe you. It's just, when I think about Mom, about how she kept this secret from us, I don't know how to feel. I'm angry at her, but I also miss her so much. It's like I'm stuck between hating her and wanting her back." Her words mirrored my own conflicted feelings, and I reached across the table to take her hand in mine. "I feel the same way. I'm angry too, and I miss her every day. But I think it's okay to feel both of those things at the same time. We can be angry at her for what she did, and still love her for everything else." Alina squeezed my hand, her eyes brimming with unshed tears. "I just wish she had told us the truth. I wish she was here so we could ask her why." "I know," I said softly. "I wish that too. But we can't change what's happened. All we can do now is focus on moving forward together." She nodded, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. "Do you think we'll be okay, Dad?" "I do," I answered, my voice firm. "It's going to take time, and there will be days when it's harder than others. but as long as we're honest with each other, and as long as we keep talking, I believe we'll be okay." She gave me a small, tentative smile, the kind that told me she wanted to believe it too. "I want us to be okay." "We will be," I assured her, my heart swelling with determination. "We'll make sure of it." As the days turned into weeks, Alina and I fell into a new routine. We spent more time together, deliberately carving out moments to talk, to reconnect. I started driving her to school in the mornings, using the time in the car to have light-hearted conversations about her day, her friends, and her plans for the future. One Saturday, we decided to clean out the garage, something Margaret had always wanted us to do, but that we'd never gotten around to. It was a daunting task, but one that felt necessary, like a symbolic gesture of making space for new memories. As we sifted through boxes of old toys, holiday decorations, and forgotten tools, we came across a box labeled Family Photos. Alina knelt down to open it, pulling out a stack of albums and loose photographs. "Look at this one," she said, holding up a picture of the three of us at the beach when she was about 5 years old. "I remember this day. I got stung by a jellyfish, and you carried me all the way back to the car." I smiled at the memory, taking the photo from her and examining it closely. "You were so brave. You didn't even cry." She laughed, a genuine sound that warmed my heart. "I remember Mom bought me ice cream afterward to make me feel better." We spent the rest of the afternoon going through the photos, reminiscing about the good times, the laughter, and the love that had filled our lives despite the recent revelations. It was a bittersweet experience, but it was also healing, reminding us that our family had been real, that the love we shared had been real. Later that evening, as we sat on the porch watching the sunset, Alina turned to me, her expression thoughtful. "Dad, do you think you'll ever forgive Mom?" she asked quietly. I took a deep breath, considering her question carefully. "I don't know if I can ever fully forgive her for what she did, but I'm trying to let go of the anger for both our sakes. I don't want to carry that burden forever, and I don't want it to come between us." She nodded, looking down at her hands. "I think I want to try to forgive her too. I know she made a mistake, but I don't want to remember her just for that." I reached over and placed a hand on her shoulder, giving it a reassuring squeeze. "That's a brave thing to do, Alina, and I think it's the right choice. Your mom loves you more than anything in this world, and I'm sure she'd want you to remember the good times, not just the mistakes." She leaned into my touch, her eyes closing as she let out a long, shaky breath. I hope she knew how much I loved her too. "She did," I said softly. "She knew." As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm, golden glow over the yard, I felt a sense of peace that had eluded me for so long. We were still healing, still finding our way through the pain, but we were doing it together. And in that togetherness, I found the strength to keep going, to keep rebuilding the life that had been shattered. The days continued to pass, each one bringing with it small victories and moments of connection. Alina and I began to talk about the future, about her dreams and aspirations. She started to open up more, sharing her thoughts and feelings with me in a way she hadn't since Margaret's death. One evening, as we sat on the couch watching a movie, she turned to me and said, "Dad, I've been thinking, maybe we should take a trip this summer, just the two of us." I looked at her, surprised but pleased by the suggestion. "A trip? Where to?" She shrugged, a playful smile on her lips. "I don't know. Somewhere we've never been before. Somewhere we can make new memories." I smiled, feeling a warmth spread through my chest. "I think that's a great idea. We could go to the mountains, or maybe the coast. Whatever you want." "Let's think about it," she said, her eyes sparkling with excitement. "We have time to plan." As we settled back into the movie, I couldn't help but feel a sense of contentment, a sense that we were truly on the path to rebuilding our lives. The scars of the past would always be there, a reminder of the pain we had endured, but they no longer held us back. Instead, they had become part of our story. A story of resilience, of love, and of the unbreakable bond between a father and his daughter. And in that bond, I found the strength to forgive, to heal, and to look forward to the future with hope.